Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks where kindred souls gather together to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as the February Room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for composite development fly rods and accessories. 40 years of Kiwi ingenuity and graphite technology, now available at cd-fishing.us or your local CD USA dealer. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And remember to go fishing. Here's your host, the Carnops, and this is the February Room.
Springtime stirs up a smorgasbord of big bugs on our local waters here in western Montana. In recent years, hatches of salmon flies, golden stones, and green drakes have occurred in the midst of runoff on our freestone rivers. This creates a dangerous situation as anglers and guides must navigate swollen rivers to fish. I thought I'd tap into the local community of Whitewater boaters for some advice on how to keep it safe out there. The owner of Zootown Surfers just so happens to be a fly angler as well, Jason Schroeder. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
I absolutely love your last name too, Schroeder. I mean, I know you have to have some fishing stories for us too. So I'd love, before we start getting into the whitewater, let's hear a fishing story.
Yeah, well, first off, we do mainly whitewater guided trips, scenic tours, and anytime somebody asks me about fishing, I tell them that we would be the absolute worst option.
Too much adrenaline.
I just started fishing a few years ago, and I'm terrible at it, and I'm okay with that. I do have some good stories, but I guess I'll start with, it wasn't just that long ago, or a confession that I was actually really scared to touch fish. So when I first started fishing with some close friends, getting past that fear was my first challenge. And even now, that's why I like to go fishing by myself, because sometimes when the fish start to like squirm and jump around, I kind of get scared. And so
what scares you about it, real quick?
They're just slimy, and I think it's weird. I grew up doing some like bass fishing, and in the South, I grew up in Atlanta, and I just remember like the bass like grabbing their mouths and like opening them up, like the teeth being kind of sharp. So I think I have this like childhood memory of like sharp teeth, sharp fins or something. So I'm working past that. That's why I usually go fishing alone.
Well, and also I have to say, I grew up learning how to fly fish on a lake, and it was a bunch of perch. And whenever you catch a perch, like I remember, like their fins are so spiny, like it was like, I didn't know how to like hold it. And for sure, you just like get stuck, and it does hurt. It does hurt a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I even asked a silly question. I asked if I should be wearing gloves, and I just immediately started getting made fun of when I started fly fishing. So I'm working past that. So.
Well, if you ever go fishing with Justin, he's trying to teach me how to double haul. And sometimes I'm like, you have to grip that thing so hard. And I'm like out there with the workout. I'm like, it's just like lifting. Like, I feel like you sometimes need a glove for the rod part, like when you're stripping and bringing it back in and going back and forth. And yeah, I'm really working hard. This summer is my goal to do a really good double haul, because I've just always struggled with that. I don't know why. It's the mechanism, like the idea of bringing my hand and then stripping it down. I don't know. I'm doing better now. I'm doing much better with my double haul casting.
That's good. I've seen videos of that, and that's about as far as I've gotten. I think I can do it. I'm not sure, but I guess one story, maybe you already passed the story part here, but I was able to go on a guided steelhead fishing trip in Wrangell, Alaska with these guys. Rick Matney, he's down in Bozeman, called I think their business is like the Chrome Chasers. And it's interesting because he called my casting flogging. And flogging, yes. So there was we'd like, it was really sweet. We'd be on this big boat, and then we'd break up into teams of two and take these really the sketchiest rafts, like dinghies you have ever seen. It was like, 3 grown men on like a tiny little inner tube. and you take these boats to these creeks, these other islands where there's nobody. We didn't see anyone else the whole trip, and so we'd hike bushwhack up these creeks. And looking for steelhead, and I was impressed how these guys were able to like hunt them down. And so we'd get to like spots where there'd be, just like one or two of them. And when it's funny because I guess this was like an opportunity of a lifetime. I didn't know all this until I got back to Missoula, and I told people how many steelhead I caught. But it was really funny because my casting was considered flogging. Sometimes we'd like miss out on a couple fish, and the guide was so much more disappointed than I was. I mean, he would literally be on the ground like throwing his hat, just like, I cannot believe you just screwed that up. I can't believe it. And I'm like, that's not a big deal. We're still eating dinner tonight. Like, life's good. It's raining out here. And he's just like, I cannot believe you. I cannot believe you.
It's like, I can't look at you.
Yeah. So anyways, that's a story for you, my flogging. So maybe one day I'll learn how to double.
Why do they call it flogging?
I don't know. I think it was just like the way I jerk around. I don't know. It's just like unorthodox, but it works. It works for me occasionally.
Well, you said you caught some steelhead. How many steelhead did you end up catching?
I got about 24 that week. So
wait, what?
Yeah, and they were huge, and it was really cool because sometimes on the way out, if the tide came in, we'd catch some of the what we call chromies. They were just silver and shiny, but it was a great trip. So,
oh my gosh! And the guide was upset when you missed one. I mean, I think
after
he was 24,
infuriated. I mean, he was crushed, just completely crushed, and I was okay with it. I was okay sucking, and it was just he was so crushed, So
well, I have to say, I don't think you suck if you've caught 24 steelhead. I mean, I can promise you do not suck if you've caught 24 steelhead. I feel like that's like the holy grail of fish. It's like you have to be really good to catch steelhead and permit. And so I'm taking my baby steps too,
Okay.
So, but congratulations. What a trip of a lifetime. So what was the water like out there? Was it rough?
Plenty of sketchy creek crossings that I would certainly put into question liability wise, but we were a pretty spry group. So, but no, it was like these smaller creeks, drainages, and you would just like bushwhack all day long in like the pissing rain with multiple rods and all your stuff for the day, and literally you're just like hunting out steelhead. But it was really exciting, like when you see like find a couple in like a certain spot. I mean, you really just get like a couple opportunities to right in front of it. And the flies themselves were really interesting. I don't know if I should be sharing this information on a
yes, you should
fishing podcast for the world to hear, but they actually like the gloves that you put on for like washing a car. There's like these squiggly things. They were making like the flies like out of like that material. It was really strange. I'd never seen anyone take like car washing products to turn them into a bug. So
well, I mean, obviously it worked, so they're on to something there, right?
It is. If Rick hears this podcast, I'll probably get a call from him. He'll probably be pretty upset that I told people.
I mean, the fact that you've just caught 24 steelhead is an adventure all in itself. And it sounds like it was kind of like a stalking, like hunting, like going bushwhacking. But I couldn't imagine bushwhacking with fly rods. I bet I would have probably broken a couple of fly rods in that kind of experience, in that situation.
Yeah, well, in that situation, I hate to say this, but being a river guide, it was my first trip I've been on where I was like the client, and I was like, they break. I don't care. I'm paying a lot of money for this trip, so whatever. So.
I feel like because you know the water so well that sometimes it's probably I think it's sometimes better not to know what the water situation is, like kind of being not in the know, because I'm sure with you being like, okay, do you know what you're doing? Because I can read the water really well. Did you find that to be in your favor or not in your favor on this trip?
Yeah, I mean, having that awareness, I certainly am able to more see what I call like the bigger picture and like identify like certain crossings where I'm like, all right, I'm thinking more like if I slip and fall here, what's my plan going to be? You know, am I going to try to swim to shore? Am I just going to like get in the defensive swim position? And like, you know, where I think that's the scariest thing, like a lot of our guests, you know, and this is why they hire us, is that they don't have that awareness. Like, it's like they don't even know really what is at stake and what the consequences are, you know, and kind of leading into talking a little bit about safety. It's like this upcoming weekend, you know, the Alberton Gorge is going to be higher than I'd like to run it. And the guests are like, well, isn't it just going to be washed out? And, you know, they don't know they don't see that bigger picture. They more see like just kind of like what's right in front of them, you know? So I definitely think it's like more beneficial. Like when I'm fishing, like I am really able to like read the water, and like I'm not just thinking about the fishing. I'm like also thinking about other scenarios of like, you know, what could happen, and if it did happen, like what am I going to do, you know?
And now a brief message from our sponsors. Here at CD USA, we have owned nearly every brand of fly rod throughout our 30-year careers as guides and globe-trotting anglers. When we discovered Composite Development's flagship fly rods, the XL2 and the ICT2, we uncovered a secret harbored by the Kiwis for 4 decades. Born from Japanese Toray, CD's unique manufacturing process involves winding the graphite fibers inside the blank, negating heavy thread wraps at the end of each section, creating a lighter and more durable fly rod. Check out the XLS2 and the ICT2 at your local CD USA dealer, or go to cd-fishing.us. And remember to go fishing.
That's a good place to be. I mean, I feel with Whitewater, it's kind of like, if you use an analogy, it's kind of like an iceberg. Like you can see the top, but there's so much more going on down below. And that's where all the danger is, because you just don't know what's, you know, what the water is doing down below, what log jams. Interesting thing. I used to, my mom always called whitewater rafting, White River. So like when I came to Montana, I was like, who's going White River rafting? And Justin looked at me one time. I mean, I was old. I mean, I was like 22 when I finally realized it's called whitewater rafting. So every time I talk to somebody about whitewater rafting, I have to really think hard not to say White River rafting. But so every time I'm like, okay, I hope I don't say White River rafting on this podcast. It's whitewater rafting.
Yeah.
But tell me about, because I mean, like you said, the Alberton Gorge, everything's blowing up, and we've just had a ton of rain. In your experience as a guide, like what are you looking for when it comes to water safety and getting down a water? And also as a fly angler, like wading, you know, it's like, what pockets are the best pockets to be in?
Yeah, I'm actually really surprised that it's like there's certain things like as far as like equipment goes in fishing, and then like the equipment that I have for like whitewater, you know, guiding on like the lock saw, you're starting to see a little more crossover. But like just one thing, for example, is like all my whitewater gear, I have like a P zipper, right, on my like dry suit and my bibs, where like all my fishing stuff doesn't have that. So I have to take off like all my gear. And they same with, you know, I think fishing, there's certain aspects of the equipment that could be geared more towards like higher water, you know, sketchier situations where you might want gear instead of like bibs, you might want something to help you better prepare for like a full on like swim, you know.
Yeah.
But trying to think a little bit back to your original question, I think one of the biggest things to do before, you know, you even go is just figuring out like what the conditions are like, you know, like taking the time to like see what the river levels are doing and having like a good awareness of what those conditions are like, you know, especially like it seems like on the Bitterroot River, you know, it's like class 1, but it kind of has like some class 4 or 5 consequences. You know, I feel like every year somebody has an experience out there where, you know, they come around a corner and there's like a tree down in the river, and it's like those situations you need to be like prepared for, even though it's like class 1. So just like being not just aware of like what the conditions are like, but like making sure you have like the right equipment, and thinking about like, especially I always say, you're like looking at your overall like group ability level, Like
Yeah.
who's going with you? You're only as strong as like your weakest link, and not just having the right gear, but knowing how to like use that gear. And I guess I'm probably getting off topic here, but there's like a fly fishing. I think Orvis used to put it on, like it was called like Down the Hatch or something. Um, it was like a thing at like Karis Park. Do you
Oh,
recall
okay.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's ringing a bell. Yes.
Yeah. So, but anyways, they hired me to do like a safety clinic, like throw bags, talking about like proper, like how to properly fit your life jacket. Not one person came over to my booth.
What?
It was like all fishing guides. Yeah. Like none of them had even the slightest interest in like chatting about. I think like John Herzer from Blackfoot River Outfitters was like the only guy that like came over and said hello. But like as far as like the participants and like the general like audience, none of them seemed to be concerned at all about river safety.
Which
So
isn't a good thing. I think it's because they think they're fishing. And if they're fishing, it's a
yeah.
relaxing sport. So it's not going to be dangerous or they're not going to be in a bad situation, which isn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's just a different approach. Like for instance, this Sunday we'll be on the Blackfoot River. I doubt it'll be great for fishing. I would imagine, but like we'll be out on rivers where our clients will be in like life jackets, wetsuits, splash jackets. Our guide will be in a dry suit. Have like a waist throw bag with like a tether, and we'll have like a kit with us where I'll like look like directly across from me, and there'll be like two old crusty looking dudes from Connecticut with their shorts and t-shirts on and like a fishing guide with like no life jacket on. And I don't want to I do see some guides that seems like they have like some great awareness, thinking about a little bit more about like that big picture, but
Yeah.
I can't imagine like what it would be like if one of those older guys like fell in, and like how do you get them back in without a life jacket? What are you going to grab? Their
Yeah.
hair, their arm, and then you could potentially hurt them. So, anyways, that's interesting, that contrast, I guess, of the two
Right.
different kind of user groups, and they do feel really far apart in Missoula. Like when people are like, so and so, he's a fishing guide. I'm like, I don't know any. Like they seem like really far apart, like the whitewater guides and the fishing guides.
It is so true. And it's funny because you guys are recreating on the same water, but you guys are using it for different methods. Like yours is more for adventure, adrenaline, as opposed to fishing is more for the action and getting something, catching fish.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it is interesting. It doesn't change the danger of the river just based on
right,
activity.
right.
Have you ever had a scenario where maybe things didn't go as planned on the river while whitewater rafting?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you. I'm happy to share this story. It just happened to me actually last week, and it was really humbling. I mean, I've been guiding for almost 20 years now. I've traveled around the globe on whitewater kayaking trips, and I've had plenty of like epic adventures and close calls. But to just put things into perspective, last week on the Locksaw River, I've ran it hundreds and hundreds of times, and I actually could see the takeout, and there was like probably like 100 yards from the takeout, and I had already like unstrapped, like I have like a watershed dry bag. They make the best dry bags. Typically when I get through the whitewater, I've gotten so comfortable out there, right? When I get through the whitewater,
Mhm.
I take my oar tethers off my oars so I can, I'm thinking about the takeout, right? I unstrap my bag. I took my throw bag off. I have like a waist throw bag that I wear, so that way it's always on me. I'd taken that off. I had unclipped my water bottle, my hydro flask. I'd like taken it off. I was ready to like take out, and I saw this rock right. I mean, literally, there was one rock in the middle of the river, like one. Like if there was only one rock in the whole river, and I saw it. For some reason, I kind of hesitated. I like moved forward with the raft. I'm like, then I pulled back, and then next thing you know, I have wrapped my boat around this rock.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
the boat is completely wrapped. Like our other guides are at the takeout, and I blow my whistle, right? And I think they honestly thought I was like kidding around. And then all of a sudden I started blowing it again, and they realized that there was something going on. And of course, it's class one, it's right before the takeout, and my guests were totally fine. Everybody was okay.
Yeah.
Um, but I ended up having to send, we set up like downriver safety. We had 3 guides with throw bags on the roadside of the Lochsaw, and I sent all my passengers off except for one who was a friend of mine and a former guide, and we ended up being able to um, pull on the upstream side of the raft, which then put pressure underneath the raft, and it came off like this rock. But the embarrassing thing is that because I'd unclipped all my stuff had floated down the river. It was like I'd become like complacent, and it was like a real wake up call that, like, I mean, it wasn't even in a, it's just how powerful the river is, even though it's like
Yes.
class one. And I wrapped a boat in class one, and it was like a 35 to 45 minute long scenario, and
You get all your stuff back?
I did, but it was embarrassing because I actually needed my throw bag, and I needed like a walkie talkie out of my bag, so that's just an example of how
Ugh.
things can go downhill quickly, and so the lesson I learned there is to, like, I always used to say, like, on harder whitewater kayak runs, you don't celebrate until you're at the takeout. And that was like a perfect example of, I'd celebrated a little bit too early, and like everything I needed was in my bag, which floated away, including a walkie talkie to communicate with my team. My throw bag was downstream. It was just like one of the oars had popped out. It was just like a really embarrassing situation. And so I think it really put in this perspective on keeping me more aware of the fact that it doesn't have to be in like crazy whitewater for things to like go wrong.
I bet you the most accidents happen when you're not, because like when it's the higher, like if it's a class 4, you're like, okay, like you're ready, you're geared up, you know what I mean? Like you're really planning your strategy of how to get down. And I bet you in the class 1, you do probably put your guard down. You're like, oh, I got this. I've done this so many times. And that's where probably more accidents happen for
Yeah.
not just for the experts, because you're like, oh, I got this covered. For people who don't really understand what classes mean, like how do you categorize whitewater from like class 1 to 4? Like what does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so really on an international scale, it's from class 1 through 6, and class 6 is considered, unrunnable. And in this day and age, there's a lot of folks now who are starting to run former class 6 rapids. Once a class 6 rapid is successfully ran, it's considered class 5 plus. There is a major difference between class 5 minus and class 5 plus at that scale. It's actually really significantly different. Many times, like a class 5 plus rapid is a rapid that's only been ran like once or twice, where you might get class 5 minus, which is like the North Fork of the Payette, like it's a solid class 5 river, but it gets ran successfully by like a lot of people. And at that class 5 level, the potential for death is certainly near and present. Where when you start to get down to class 4, you're talking about, there's potentially holes that might be more retentive. There's a possibility of like flipping, a raft. There's still the possibility of losing somebody, but and then you kind of get down more into like class 3. It would be considered like some rocks, some maybe like, a small retentive hole, breaking waves, um, some other, small potential hazards if you were to go swimming. And then, of course, down to like class 2, which would be like Thibodeau Rapid on like the Blackfoot River, which probably a lot of people are familiar with, right? It's pretty
Right.
straightforward. If you were to swim through it, there probably wouldn't be any consequences. You might hit the rock, but there's no strainers, there's no log jams, there's no sieves, and you would probably be just fine. At worst case, get like a bruise. Where like class 1 would be considered like the town stretch here in Missoula, right? If you fall off your
Yeah.
tube, you just stand up in the river and get back in your tube and keep going, where there's no breaking waves, no holes, really just like flat water. So
first off, you're talking about like tubing, like those little circle tubes. I can't stand those.
yeah,
like I don't understand why people like those. Like my butt gets cold.
Yeah.
Like my back hurts. Maybe I'm just getting older.
Yeah.
But I've never liked tubing. I'm like, why is this enjoyable? Like you just kind of sit there but you just see a lot of people, especially in Missoula, in the summertime when it starts getting warm. There's so many tubers, and there's always there's always an accident.
Yeah.
Where people are thinking that, oh, I have a inflatable device and I'm safe, but then they go through some rapids and they aren't good swimmers.
Yeah.
I've heard some stories about that too, and I think it's just always being cautious.
Yeah.
Even on those class ones.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things too with the inner tubers, I have no problems with it. I personally don't enjoy it myself. I'm originally from Atlanta, so I usually freeze my ass off when I'm inner tubing. And I'm
Me
ADHD
too.
too. I can't imagine like sitting on a tube and just doing nothing for 2 hours. I know that. But one of the things too is the preparedness. Like you do see some inner tubers that have like, a mesh bag with them. They have like a dry bag that might have some dry clothes. I always say dress for the takeout, meaning like, bring some extra clothing with you. I get cold a lot of times at the end of runs, so I always pack like extra dry layers for waiting around for a shuttle. That's always a good idea. But the thing with a lot of these tubers is it's the awareness, and a lot of it is just simple river etiquette. I see tubers out there with loose beer cans and like bottled beer and like things that where if they fall, the tube flips over, Brennan's wave, and ends up being like a yard sale of trash. And I think that's really disappointing to see. And I know that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks actually is looking to hire some river ambassadors to be at some of the busier access sites this summer to help, talk a little bit more about river etiquette, help people with boat safety, and just kind of be there as a sounding board to try to create more awareness to make a better experience, educate people so we can all have a little bit of a better experience out there. Because I think a lot of people just don't know what the river etiquette is. They don't know that they shouldn't bring glass. They don't know that they should bring some extra layers and that it could start snowing in July. They just don't know these things. So
I think that's a great idea. I mean, it wasn't too long ago too. I mean, you're not allowed to, but remember the bridge incident in Missoula? There was some kid who was jumping off the bridge and then jumped on some tuber. Oh gosh, that still just gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
But it's also trying to be, I actually, now that since that story happened or that incident happened, every time Jess and I go under a bridge, I'm always looking to make sure there isn't some kid about to jump off.
Yeah.
Looking downriver. Jason, I was curious if you could give a scenario. So say I am fishing, I'm wade fishing, and I'm deciding I'm going to go cross the river, and I don't realize how strong the current is. I fall in. What would you recommend for me to do in order to avoid any potential bad endings?
Well, first off, before I would do any kind of crossing, I'm going to look not only upstream, but I'm going to look downstream as well, because I already want to think about the potential of me slipping and falling. And then what am I going to do when I'm in the river and the current sweeping me downstream? So, and that would mean looking for potential exit routes, right? So if I'm like above Brennan's wave, the water's high, I slip and fall, right? Obviously there's some hazards to think about there. There's an island, there's some bridge pillars. So just having kind of like an exit plan, right? If you do fall in, I think, I know it's really hard and fishing stuff's expensive, but I see this a lot in whitewater sports, but we all spend a lot of money on equipment, and there's certain scenarios where everyone is so worried about the equipment that they forget what is really important, and that's yourself or the other bodies, people in the river, right? Because the equipment's replaceable, we're not. So my recommendation would be to, if you have to, and let go of your gear, throw your rod in, forget about it, and think about rescuing yourself and you might need your hands and you might need your legs. So if you have to forget about your equipment, just do so. But thinking a little bit too about, I think, in a fishing scenario, a lot of times, the water's lower. It might be like a lower volume setting where the potential for like a foot entrapment could be a possibility. So thinking about the two different swim positions, the first one that I'd probably use on a low volume river and that I have used falling in the river fishing is the defensive swim position, which is on my butt, feet facing downstream. And I always say I want to see your toes and your nose. But the biggest thing to take away from both the defensive swim position and the aggressive swim position is just keeping your feet near the surface to avoid a potential foot entrapment. So that's what I'd consider if I accidentally fell in the river, is more thinking about rescuing myself and trying to avoid a potential foot entrapment. So
And what about the scenario if you're on a boat? You're kind of like how you had something happen to you on your class one, but say you're fishing and you're guiding somebody or you're on the oars and you're just kind of paying more attention to the angler than you are downriver,
yeah,
and you find yourself kind of stuck in an embankment. Like, what is the best way to try and, you know, first off, you should try and avoid that scenario. But say you just end up, unfortunately getting yourself caught in between, maybe the pillars or, a log jam.
yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. And really it just depends on like the situation and
Right.
kind of what's right in front of you. I mean, again, the obvious answer is know where you're going. Like pay attention, have good awareness, and continue to look downstream and really just try to avoid those kind of situations. I mean, you see wood in the river, like go around it. You see bridge
Yeah.
pillars, go around it. But in a situation with like, I mean, the first thing I would do is, again, I would forget about all my equipment and just figure out what I need to do to get my guest, to safety. Maybe it's something as simple as getting them out of the boat and having them crawl on like the log, jam that's like on the river,
Yeah.
or um, but that can be a really scary situation. Generally speaking, when you encounter, like if you're swimming in the river or you encounter like a log jam, you want to try to get up and over it, right? Not underneath it where there could be things that you can't see, kind of like the iceberg. But I mean, honestly, it seems like most of the rivers around here, it's pretty rare that there's all of a sudden just like a huge freaking log like blocking the whole river. So again, just having like the proper skills on the river that you're on and make sure that it's applicable, for the class river that you're on. You shouldn't be on a class 3, 4 fishing river if you're not very good at rowing. And so I think I'm kind of like dodging a specific answer for that question for a reason. But I think one thing I'd encourage all fishing guides to do who are going to be guiding on some more difficult whitewater is taking like a swiftwater rescue class, and like a scenario based rescue training for like those what if scenarios. So it's not a one size fits all for all of them, right? That's why it's hard to answer that question.
So true. I mean, yeah, it was probably a loaded question, but yeah, you're so right. I think not too long ago there was the Whitewater rescue class, and I was watching some videos, and they actually had scenarios where the log jam
Yeah.
scenario, where you're going down river and you see the log jam, and it was interesting watching that video or watching these videos because they're doing the scenario like you're the participant and you're going down, and I was thinking to myself, I don't even know if I'd be brave enough to pretend like there's a dangerous situation going on, but that's the reality. Like you just have to keep preparing, and it was also them trying to get over the log
Yeah.
jam, right? Not going under, and just how hard it was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that big of a they obviously brought a log to make that scenario, but how strong it was pulling everybody with just a small branch. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't all that much, but it's just crazy how strong the river is. And I think that's the thing that's even with your class one situation is that it's still strong.
Yeah.
Like the river still can move and pull very hard, even on a class one with enough force when it's bringing, momentum down
Yeah.
below.
Yeah. And again, I think that's why those classes are important, because it's the same like thinking about like sometimes with our new guides, they'll be like, I'm not going to wear my dry suit today. And I'm like, all right, well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to you wear the gear that the clients are going to wear, and you jump in the river and you tell me how it feels. Um, so just again, as a river professional, being prepared, it's not about you. It's about being ready to help someone else or other guests. And even in the summertime, I mean, don't get me wrong. August guiding on the gorge, I got my nice Patagonia sun hoodie on. I don't wear a ton of clothing, but honestly, like we have the 15-minute rule. Like if you can't spend 15, 20 minutes submersed in the river, then you're underdressed. As a guide.
Oh,
So
that's a good rule of thumb. I didn't even think about that because, I've obviously gone swimming on the gorge, but it's always for an increment of like 5 minutes. I'll just like swim a little bit and then I get
yeah,
out into the shoreline,
yeah.
and it's still really cold even in
It
August.
really is, and that's why in these classes, they talk a lot about that, and that's why a lot of times when you see guides, you might get heckled a little bit, but it's like I typically have like a dry top on when I'm guiding. Typically, it's got to be a really hot day for me because that's what I'm always thinking about. I'm like, if I had to, be involved in a river rescue situation, could I be in the water for 15, 20, 30 minutes and feel good about that, So
Well, and I'm curious, Jason, because I feel like Whitewater is kind of like adrenaline junkie, kind of, because I think it's, very dangerous, but you're so very cautious and also take it very seriously. How did you get into this Whitewater and the owner of Zootown
yeah,
Surfers?
so it's a good question. I first got into Zootown. My former business partner, Scott Doherty, who really founded Zootown, he owned this international kayaking school called World Class Kayak Academy, and it was a traveling high school that traveled around the globe, and a group of like elite kayakers. And so when I started paddling, my eyes were wide open, and I'd never done anything like it, and I just was so happy. And I just graduated college, and he was like, "Hey, I want to start this like recruiting program to try to recruit more students for the school, and I want to do it in Missoula." And he's like, "I'm going to call it Zootown Surfers." And so that's really how it all started. And I was like a little kid in a candy shop. I'm like, oh my god, I get to like work with like professional kayakers and people who've been in the outdoor industry and all these like professional dirt bags, and get to learn how to like teach kayaking. And so really for many years we just did youth kayaking and whitewater kayaking, but there's not much money to be made in whitewater kayaking. And so since then, he and I have parted ways, and we've become a full-on like river company. We still do whitewater kayaking, but it's a really niche sport, which is one of the things that makes it cool. But that's how it all really started.
So, you said that you've only been fly fishing for 2 years. So, what made you decide to finally grab a fly rod and go fishing from your adventures at Zootown Surfers?
I think I can attribute that to my one of my other friends, Justin, really, and just I think I'm always thinking about variety is the spice of life, so to speak. I
I
always
love
like
that.
trying new things, and I still love, river surfing and whitewater kayaking, but I'm really enjoying. It's fun for me to like suck at something and be a beginner, and there's so much to learn about it. And I'm kind of obsessed with like becoming like, I don't ever want to be like a fishing guide, but I want to be like really good at it, and there's so much to the
Mm-hmm.
sport. But I think I'm also, I really love fly fishing, but I also like to keep it really simple. It seems like we have so many things at our fingertips these days with like equipment and
Yes.
fancy stuff. I try to sometimes kind of keep it stupid simple, and that kind of keeps it fun for me. Like I don't really like I don't really like fly fishing in a boat. I prefer to like wade fish because I'm always in a boat, and I just really like
Yeah.
grabbing my fishing rod and some basic fishing tackle and supplies and just like walking around. I guess for me, it's not so much about catching the fish. It's about just like being outside and finding some like time to myself, to think about all the other moving parts going on in my life. And so I really like that part of fishing for me, that style.
I honestly can relate to that a whole lot because I've been fly fishing for probably 5-6 years, but for the past 2 years I've been really trying to practice my casting and learning, and it's really fun. And I didn't think, because the things that you've mastered when you're in your mid 30s, you kind of feel like, oh, I know how to do all these things, and to pick up a new sport and try and get good at it is it's really fun, and I love it. And it's interesting because we have a lot of friends who are now starting to get into fly fishing, and I just tell them in the beginning, I'm like, in the beginning for me it wasn't fun because the mechanisms didn't just click right away.
Yeah.
And I was like, you have to get out there and you have to keep practicing. But yeah, and I like being on the boat because I can always go wade fishing,
Right.
which is interesting. I'm like, I want to go on the boat,
Right.
on a hard boat too. Like I don't want to go on a raft.
Yeah.
Because I like to be comfortable,
Yeah.
and I like to sit there. And if I don't want to fish, I can sit back and relax. And especially with the kids, it's easier to be on a harder boat, on a drift boat, than on the
Right.
raft. But
Right.
well, and Jason, so if people are wanting to reach out to you, and is there still availability this summer for people to go book with Zootown Surfers?
Yeah, no, we're not like the fishing guides. We never say no. We run trips all day long, all summer long. You can book now or you can book last minute, but we got a short season to make a living, and we always pull it off. And so there's plenty of room for all of our activities. There are some days that are busier than others, but there's plenty of opportunities to get out on the river with us.
And what's the best way for them to reach you? Is it just website or Instagram, or what's the best way to get that booked?
Yeah, going to zootownsurfers.com is probably the best route for that. We do have a really active social media presence, and we try to post some good content on there and resources. So checking out Zootown Surfers on Instagram or Facebook's a great resource as well. So.
And I don't know why, but I love seeing people's faces when they hit a big water wave, like seeing people's splashes, and they're about to go hit one, and their faces are like, like, I don't know why. That is like the best photos ever.
Yeah.
Like, you can't leave a family trip without getting one of those photos of everyone's expression.
There's 3 different types of rafters, clients that come. There's the people that laugh, and then the people that scream, and then the oh my goders. So when you're
I'm the oh my goders.
Yeah.
I mean, I am that way all the time.
Yep. So we kind of broke them up into 3 different categories.
I love it, because I think isn't there some photographer that just sits on that rock on Alberton Gorge and just takes a bunch of photos?
Yes.
Yes.
Mike Malamet, my friend Mike, he is a complete savage. The fact that he sits out there all summer long and captures everyone's photo. You can check out those photos on Montana River Photography. It's really fun and entertaining to look at all those photos, especially like during peak gorge season, just all the people coming through down there. It's a lot of fun. So
there are some gems in there, especially the ones where like people are kind of like unexpectedly not realizing what's going to happen. Like I think there was one where somebody lost something, and but yeah, he'll be like, I found at the end of it, he's like, someone has lost this, and this, and this. And I think to myself, oh, that is just true glory. Like if you just need some time to just kind of, you have 15 minutes of a break, you just like look at your phone and start looking at all those pictures, because it is so funny. Jason, I mean, I know you also have you're also a realtor. So if maybe people are thinking, I'm going to go whitewater rafting in Missoula and then I'm going to buy a house, which this market is very crazy right now. Yeah. Is there a way that they can follow you specifically?
Yeah, they can reach out. I'm on Instagram for that as well, J Shredder Housing. I don't post a ton of housing stuff. It's mostly family stuff, but I work for
Which is the best
a
things.
small boutique company here called Zill Estate, and I really love it. And yeah, I can shred a class 5 real estate transaction. So
I have to say, that is the best last name, right? Shredder? Were you like, I was born to shred? I bet you got so many cool nicknames.
it's really embarrassing at Snowball when people are like, "Hey, Shredder," and I'm like falling over. And on the river, I feel really comfortable with the last name, but skiing and fly fishing and anything else, I'm kind of like, it's Jason. So, but yeah,
I'm not shredding anything.
it's people ask me all the time if the funniest question I get is people like, "Did you change your last name, man?" And I'm like, no, it's really my last name.
Oh, well, it's a great last name. And thank you so much for joining me today, Jason, and sharing your experience fly fishing. And hopefully you can get over that fear of catching fish. But I can understand it. Like, I can understand the creepiness. I get nervous about releasing the hook. Like, sometimes I don't want to hurt their mouth.
Barbless
So,
hooks. That's another thing I got turned on to. This is probably a whole nother podcast, but yeah, I fish now with only barbless hooks, and that's been really beneficial, I think, for me. And like,
oh, me too.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, that's how I used to catch those perch back in the day. With it being barbed hooks,
Absolutely.
and it was just awful.
Absolutely.
I mean, those poor perch.
Yeah.
Apologies, perch back in the day.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com, where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.